So when we talk about the fire element, we're talking about the Shen. We're talking about our emotional life, not our impulses, but the truth of our emotions. We're talking about connection um, with others and this connection with life. And we're also talking about intimacy. And intimacy requires vulnerability and availability, right? You can't have real intimacy in life. And when I say intimacy, I don't necessarily mean physical or sexual intimacy. I mean intimacy with every moment. When we're really present, there's an intimacy to the weather, to clouds passing over the horizon. There's an intimacy to the breath. There's an intimacy to animals can teach us about intimacy because they're always present, right? Or if you sit quietly with a plant and you really pay attention to the beingness of a plant in the forest, it can teach you intimacy. Life is intimate, and we don't experience the intimacy of life by thinking about it, right? We experience the intimacy of life by being present and emotionally available to and by being embodied with the beingness that is inherent in us and the beingness that is inherent in all things around us. There can be no intimacy in life without presence. So, you know, love and presence and consciousness are one field of energy. There's no separation between them. So, to really experience love in any form of relatedness is just to be present. So I want to talk a little bit about these qualities of the fire element. Fire in the context of human psychosomatic physiology and Taoist medicine is about luminosity. It's the inner radiance of the heart. It's not about intensity. When we think of fire, we kind of think of intensity. Um, and I wanted to share this passage from Chuangzi. Chuangzi was a Chinese philosopher. He's described as a coyote bodhisattva or a mystic anarchist. He's kind of this wild sage who was alive in the 300s BC in China. And he left us some extraordinary writing. There's a book called The Second Book of the Tao by Stephen Mitchell, which are translations of Chuangzi. It is one of my absolute all-time favorite books ever written. It's incredible. If you want some good Taoist material, The Second Book of the Tao is incredible. And so there's a passage, one of them, where it's Chuangzi referring to himself in third person. He's a very cheeky teacher. And he says, Chuangzi dreamed he was a butterfly, fluttering about, enjoying itself. He did not know he was Chuangzi. Suddenly he awoke, and there he was, solid and unmistakable, Chuangzi. But he did not know whether he was Chuangzi who had dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he was Chuangzi. So it's playing with this concept of paradox, right? And the story is usually used in a philosophical context to say, how do we know what we know? It's a question about knowing. And how do you know if you're awake or asleep in a dream and what's real and not real and what's solid and not solid? Our thoughts are dreams in a sense, right? We just fabricate realities in our minds and then inhabit them. But I wanted to use that short little story to talk about these qualities of fire. One of them is ease of identity. Chuangzi in the story doesn't have any anxiety about who he is. He's playfully saying, am I a butterfly? Am I a man? Am I awake? Am I asleep? Am I dreaming? There's no clinging to the self definition. And a healthy Shen, a healthy heart, It's through the heart that we experience the oneness of life. From the experience of the heart, there's no separation between ourselves and others. There's not a separation between ourselves and life. That illusion of separation is created by the mind. And so this ease of identity is there's nothing to defend. Chuangzi is just curious. Am I a butterfly dreaming I'm a man? Am I awake? Am I asleep? There's not a fixed identity. And this is a very central concept to Taoism. And it's also part of the path of feeling more at ease with life, is not being so fixed in our egoic identity about who we are. My roles, my titles, my status, my financial situation, my friend group, my autobiographical self that I have to defend and protect. And the other quality about it is this radiance without effort. The butterfly represents pure aliveness. There's no performance, there's no striving. It's just simple joy, right? And it's not joy that's derived from stimulation. So much of what we call joy is actually the impulse, the pursuit of impulse and pleasure. Whereas joy is a naturally arising radiance that comes from an open heart. This is very central to the fire element. And the last thing about the story is comfort with intimacy and ambiguity. There's no need in the story to resolve the paradox of whether he's a butterfly or a man. The heart is okay with uncertainty. It can stay present with uncertainty. It doesn't need to figure everything out. And this is connected to real connection, to this oneness that is always present, that we were kind of exploring in the meditation. A healthy Shen or a healthy heart doesn't need to rush to stabilize its identity. It's not constantly defending itself. There's a light present in this fire, but it's not a heat that burns. It's the light of consciousness. And this is very central to a healthy heart, to a healthy fire. Hey, my dog is eating my rug. Come here. That's not for you. Hey, psst, come over here. Hey, come here. Puppies are a real trip, aren't they? So, I want to talk a little bit about, the last thing about that story is that when the heart is settled and still, even not knowing is a form of intimacy. And this is a very central concept in Zen and in Taoism, the idea of emptiness or not knowing, not needing to know, right? And that there can be an intimacy and an immediacy to not knowing that is a deeper form of knowing. It's really the knowing of the heart, of the connection, of the oneness of life. So, healthy fire energy can stay present without burning things. And this is more connected to the light of fire instead of the heat of it. And this is very important in relationships. Hey, please stop eating my rug. Hey, hey, come here. Osha, psst, come here. Come here. Come here. Um, so I want to talk, I don't want to say these are more superficial qualities of fire, but they're more connected to the personality of fire, the season of fire, to give you kind of a general sense and feel for it in other people, in yourself. The fire is connected to the height of yang energy, which is the summertime, right? And in the summer is expansive and it's warm and expressive. Humans connect, they go outside. There's more visibility, right? Fire is very connected to the eyes, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And the Chinese character for Huo is um, it's got these like two lines coming down and then these sparks coming off of it. And the sparks almost look like a child with their arms up in the air. And there's the spontaneous joy that children have. Children are present and joyful, and it's this natural connection to life. Kids don't really want to talk about, I have a 5-year-old son. They don't really want to talk about the plan. They just want to play now, they're present. And there's a natural joy that arises. When you look in a child's eyes, you can see the Shen clearly. It's very bright because it hasn't been conditioned by life yet. Um, the character also looks like somebody with their arms reaching out to connect with others. And so fire is very connected to touch. The heart meridian runs down the inside of the arms. And so when we hug another person or when we physically, hey, stop eating the carpet. Hold on, I've got to get my dog to stop eating my rug. Just give me 1 second. Nothing. I'm becoming less and less attached to anything in my house because my dog is dismantling it systematically here. Um, so fire is very outward facing, right? When we talked about water and metal, these are inward facing or downwards moving energies, which are important in Qigong and Tai Chi and different movement arts. Um, the summer and the fire are very much about outwards facing, right? You open the doors and the windows of your house, you go out and you connect with people. It's the time of gathering and celebration and relationships. And fire personalities they're social, they're expressive, they are often referred to as the life of the party. They're warm, they're connective. We see fire personalities a lot in like hosts and performers and clowns, and teachers and community builders. They're creative people and they're kind of referred to as social butterflies, right? Which is also why that story was kind of relevant. They want to connect. And fire energy is so much about connection, emotional connection. They're very communicative. You can kind of see a fire type constitutionally. Oftentimes in men, they start losing their hair, and that's kind of symbolic or metaphoric for the fire is literally burning the hair off. Like they bald. They're often kind of slender and quick-witted, and they're light and they're speedy and they gesticulate a lot and they're animated, right? The spark is there. And so fire type people are connectors. They want to connect. And when it's a healthy fire, they bring a lot of warmth and excitement and joy. They often have a very good sense of humor. Laughter is the sound of fire. So you're around a fire person when they're like cracking jokes and they're fun to be around, you know? They might not have the depth of water or the clarity and refinement of metal or the sort of caretaking of earth. Fire types get bored easily, right? If you know somebody who's got a big personality, they, if you're not like kind of entertaining them or they're not able to entertain you, then they kind of move on quickly, right? And so they can sometimes suffer from a need for stimulation. They can suffer from addictions. They like stimulants. they want to have experiences. And when they're unhealthy, they can be addicted to sex, addicted to things that are speedy. They might drink a lot of coffee. They want to have experiences, right? They're the type of people who stimulate and also want to be stimulated. And we probably all know people who fit that kind of description, right? But when they're healthy, they're incredible at building community and connecting people. And I want to say a little bit about the way that fire people kind of connect with others, like how they love, how they receive love. And then I'm hoping I have time to go a little bit deeper into the Shen and specifically what's called the heart kidney axis or the Jing Shen, which is the relationship between water and fire, which is very important. I don't know if I'll get to all of it. Whatever I don't get to, I'll follow up in an email. I realized in teaching this course, these are big topics, and we could literally do a 10-week class just on the Shen and on the fire element. So this is more to kind of just give you a sense, and to encourage you to explore it further. So so fire people, they love through presence. And presence again is about the capacity to stay with what is alive in the moment. They express through emotional availability, through warmth, attention, and responsiveness. Fire types want an emotional connection. They don't care much about obligations and social contracts and long-term planning and safety and the things we talked about with the water element and the wood element, safety and security and loyalty and depth. And that's not essential to a fire type. What they want is emotional connection, intimacy, and warmth and responsiveness. When fire types become imbalanced, intensity replaces intimacy. Um, you know, the way that they connect with others becomes performative and disingenuous, right? They're trying to entertain instead of naturally that natural spontaneity of the heart. And if fire is deficient, they might withdraw because fire types can get overwhelmed easily and become anxious. So anxiety in a healthy fire type, joy is naturally present when the person's able to be present. When fire's out of control or when it's in excess, it leads to anxiety. So anxiety in the body, when you feel really anxious and overwhelmed by life, that's an excess of fire, too much heat in the mind, right? You're not present. The way that fire types receive love and receive care from others is through being felt and met. So again, this emotional connectivity is really central to fire types. Um, I remember reading in something that like if fire was a spirit animal, it'd be a dolphin. And you think about all the animals in the plant or all the animals in the animal kingdom, and dolphins are the ones that are quick and they're playful and they want to play, right? And they kind of have a laughter about them, a joy about them, right? Um, Fire types don't receive love through duty and practicality and reliability. They connect through clear emotional presence, through eye contact, through tone of voice, which is very intimate if you really are paying attention to the tone, not just the words, through spontaneity, through warmth, and through touch. Um, so this kind of gives you a little sense of fire types want aliveness and affection and emotional immediacy, right? They don't want rigidity. When they're in excess, they can burn out and they can feel chronically dissatisfied. They can be impulsive and reckless. So I have friends who are fire types, and when we were younger, they were the ones you were worried about, like that they would get in trouble because they were reckless and they were kind of emotionally volatile, you know? Um, and when it's not grounded, when the fire isn't grounded, there can be a sense of chronic dissatisfaction. So there's always a need for experience and stimulation. Um, so that's a little bit kind of about the general qualities of fire. And I realize that I am running out of time and I haven't been able to get into the deeper material. But I think what I'll mention here is embryologically, the heart starts growing first, right? In the when the embryo starts growing in the body. And the first thing to grow out of the heart is the tongue, right? Which is fascinating. The tongue develops from the same field, from the same tissue. So the tongue is like the heart reaching outwards. And speech is the fire element made audible. It is the heart made audible. And our words carry warmth or cold, invitation or withdrawal. So much about um, fire and intimacy and presence is listening for the tone. Where do people speak from? That immediately brings you into a more present field than just the information that's being conveyed. But the truth is that fire doesn't want to just speak. It's not intimate enough. It wants to be felt. So fire types are really interested in the emotional field that's created between people. And if you think about the tongue, and again, this is getting into kind of fire material and the intimacy. Fire types want intimacy. The tongue, the breath, timing, and presence, these are all so central to intimacy. Um, you know, I remember also reading somewhere, kissing is speech without words. Um, and some comedian said somewhere, I was trying to find it last night, I couldn't. He said, you can fake sex longer than you can fake kissing. And so, this quality of guardedness or openness, of giving and receiving is so central to the fire type or to fire. And there's the pericardium is a sac that protects the heart. And it's because heart-centered people, fire people are very vulnerable. If you think, I watched this documentary recently on Janis Joplin, and she to me, like most of the artists who, Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, like a lot of the people, Jeff Buckley, who died young, the 27 Club, these were like creative, highly creative, emotionally vulnerable, available people who were burning to create. They were just creating, 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 and they burned out, right? That's why they died young. If you want an example of a quintessential fire type, watch this Janis Joplin documentary. It's brilliant. She had so much emotional availability, she was wounded by it because she couldn't be received. She said, I'd play these shows and have thousands of people and feel this incredible love and connection. And then I'd go home alone and feel so intensely alone, you know? So this is kind of the quintessence of a fire type. It's not in balance, which is why fire types can be wounded easily. And if there is childhood wounding or there's not the real nourishment and love and support, um, you know, wounding can organize intimacy around threat. So intimacy doesn't feel safe. And there's a loss of a sense of volition. So the heart closes because it's too painful, to feel that vulnerability, to feel that much love and not have it be received. And so part of healing wounding with the heart is reclaiming choice and volition, which is about stepping out of victimhood and choosing to be able to make choices and connect with volition that comes from the heart instead of from the mind. This is central to healing trust and to unfreezing volition, bringing warmth to our capacity to make choices. Okay, this is such a juicy topic. There's so much we could talk about here. But I don't want to keep people on too long. What I'll do is I will leave it there for those of you who have to go. And I'm going to stay on for a few more minutes and just talk a little bit about the Shen because it's a really kind of central part of it's a very central aspect of the fire element. So the Shen is really considered the empress in Taoist medicine, or the emperor, that oversees all of the other energies in the body. So when we talk about the five elements, the fire element in the heart is really central. It's what gives guidance and the wisdom to all of the other elements. So it's the light of consciousness that's in the heart, and it's consciousness in relationships. So from the heart's perspective, separation is an illusion, and the present moment is the only one that's real. And this is really the root of wisdom, of all wisdom teachings, right? Are all rooted in presence and oneness, essentially. And intimacy with life, as well as intimacy with another human being, it doesn't create that union or that oneness. It reveals it. And this is the real power of open-heartedness, of open-hearted love, is the access to the intimacy that reveals that life is one. You know, that we are part of a great stream of life. We're not separate from life. And the signs of a healthy Shen, of a healthy heart, are comfort with intimacy, which is presence, and with awareness, right? Which is kind of what that story at the beginning was about. We assess the health of a person's Shen and the health of their heart through their eyes in Chinese medicine. So if I'm sitting with somebody in a diagnostic intake, right, I'm looking at their eyes, and is there softness or are they rigid and hard? Are they able to stay present with you and to maintain eye contact? Or are they constantly looking around and avoiding the connection, right? Is there comfort with silence, or do they need to fill in all the space? This ability to stay present and vulnerable and intimate with another is dependent on how intimate and vulnerable we are able to be with ourselves, right? We can only be vulnerable and love somebody else to the extent we are able to be vulnerable with ourselves and present with ourselves, and to the extent we're able to love ourselves. Um, and when I say love, I mean like accept every part of ourselves. And this gets into shadow work, which we'll talk about in the metal class. You know, so oftentimes the issue isn't love. The issue is what blocks love, you know? Because consciousness and presence and love are one energy. It's one field. When a person has a healthy Shen, it's quiet and it radiates out. It's a quiet aliveness. And when you're around somebody who has a healthy Shen, it puts you at ease. There's not a fire that's burning for connection, you know? And there's also, when the Shen is coherent, there's nothing hidden. You know, as Lonnie Jarrett, one of my teachers says there's nothing on the hard drive. You know, they're not protecting or hiding or like denying aspects of themselves. And when that is present, there's a coherence. Whereas when there's things that a person's hiding from themselves, when they avoid themselves, when they aren't really present with themselves, then it shows up as mixed signals. They're hot and then they're cold. There's incongruence in the speech. Remember, we talked about the tongue. So their words don't seem consistent, or they don't communicate and articulate themselves clearly. You kind of don't know what the hell they're saying half the time, you know? Or they say one thing, but they do another. Another way to see an incoherent Shen is that there's confusion, right? You don't know how to relate to the person, or you're like, I'm just kind of I don't get that person. I can't read them. There's not the coherence that they present. The other thing about a healthy Shen is that it can stay present in intimacy, whereas an unstable or unhealthy Shen is overwhelmed by closeness, right? Um, the very last thing I want to say is just a word on attachment styles. So people who have an avoidant attachment style and it where it shows up in the fire element is closeness feels dangerous. And so they control and they regulate intimacy, right? And they use control to replace vulnerability because the fire element doesn't feel safe. Being too close, too open, too vulnerable doesn't feel safe. And so they'll regulate intimacy. And there's a lot of what are called deactivating strategies to keep closeness at bay. Not too close, not too vulnerable, right? Whereas an anxious attachment, um, they try to gain a sense of safety and a sense of um, they want safety and reassurance through sex and through intimacy. So they want more of it. And they're kind of always looking for a sense of safety and intensity because that makes them feel safe. It calms that anxiousness. But what they're doing is they're confusing closeness with safety, right? So the problem with anxious and avoidant connections is both of the partners are trying to regulate fire in their bodies, but they're doing it in opposite directions, right? Which creates these unhealthy loops. Whereas a secure attachment, secure relationships, there can be presence and vulnerability and intimacy and closeness, and the person's able to just stay present with it. There's no neediness, and there's also no avoidance. There's no pushing away and regulating closeness. So there's a lot to explore in the fire element with attachment, but all of that really is rooted in what kind of environment your parents or your primary caretakers created for you when you were young around closeness and vulnerability and communication and whether or not those were available and they were healthy. Because if they weren't, then we likely developed some survival tactic where we avoid too much connection with one person or we hyperfixate on one person. We're constantly trying to get reassurance and love and affection and reassurance that everything's okay, right? And so are where these imbalanced attachments show up. You know, what the literature says is that like 50% of attachments are unhealthy and 50% of the human population is capable of secure attachments, of healthy attachments. And also, depending on the dynamic we have with somebody, they can bring out more of an anxious or avoidant attachment in us, right? Um, so, I think in short, like fire energy really wants to be met emotionally. And healthy fire is about propriety. It's like, am I present? Am I home? Is the master home? Am I making choices? Do I have volition? Am I clear about the health of my relationships? Am I available? Am I emotionally in touch? Am I connected? Right? So fire types need connection and emotional availability and intimacy and vulnerability. Um, and that might be you, it might be somebody you know, but this can help you navigate some of those relationships to know what needs fire people are trying to get met and what they really value. Okay, we could go on here for another hour, but that kind of gives you a good sense generally of this personality type and this makeup and how these people relate to one another. Um, there's real wisdom in fire when it's balanced. It's really the voice of the conscience of the soul that's guiding us in life. It's what tells us what's true. We don't think about the truth. We sense it. We feel it. So when the Shen is healthy, you can see your path clearly. Your choices come from a place of wisdom of it's not the gut. It's the heart. It's the conscience. This feels right, or that's off. That's clear. It's a sense that comes from an emotional intelligence. Um, and when we're really in touch with the Shen, it can guide us towards what's called the Ming or your destiny, right? That relationship, that person, that connection, that spark. That spark is connecting me to that decision. And it's not impulse or desire or pleasure or pursuit or whatever. It's wisdom. It's the wisdom of the heart that's guiding us. And we can cultivate that through presence. Reason 7,421 to continue meditating and cultivating mindfulness in your life, because that mindfulness is what guides wisdom and intelligent, wise choices, right? All right. I'll stick around for a few minutes. And if you have questions about this topic, you're welcome to ask. And if you need to go, thank you so much for joining for another week of exploring this topic. You're feeling, I think you have an anxious attachment and are feeling a lot of fire energy right now. Um,
Okay, Colin, so there's a question of how does fire differ from wood? They seem similar.
um, there there are similarities, but they're quite different. And if wood is about growth and directionality and purpose and direction, right? Wood is we're going this way. It's about pushing forward. It's about the leading edge of growth. It's about what is the vision? Where am I going? What are we creating here? What are my wishes, my ambitions, my wood is willful, and it moves in a direction. Fire is about presence. It is about immediacy, openness, what's happening in this present moment, not having a fixed identity. Wood's about defining and authoring your life. This is who I am, and I'm out making these things happen, and I am authoring my life, and I'm creating my life, and I have a vision, and I have a plan, and I'm making decisions based on this plan to get to create my vision, right? It's very directional. It's very growth oriented. Whereas fire is established in oneness. In From a space of oneness, there's nothing that needs to be done, right? There's nowhere to go but here. And it's about what is available and true in this moment. What is it's the intimacy of the breath. It's the intimacy of the connection in this moment. It's the spark of that connection. Fire is warm and loving and open and vulnerable and emotionally available and wants to connect. Wood wants to connect to the extent that it is in service to growth, that it is in service to the plan. It's going in a direction. So while they're both outward moving, they are both external, um, and they both are expansive energies. They're quite different in the way that they show up in relationships and in personality types and in the world, right? Does that clarify the distinction, or do you want me to say more about it?
That clarifies it.
Okay.
And then there was two questions around speaking to the fire-water connection.
Okay. Um, what are the what are the connections, or what are the questions?
Speak a little to the fire-water connection.
Yeah. I wanted to, okay. Great. So this um, is a very central and important concept in Chinese medicine, and it really starts to get into the Taoist side of the medicine, which is called what's called Jing Shan, which is Jing is the water. It's the energy held in the kidneys of water, My dog is literally like, if you don't take me outside, I'm gonna start destroying everything in the house. Hey, just cool it. I just need like 5 minutes. Is that cool? Five? Can we negotiate here a little bit? So Jing is our genetic potential that is held in, it's what's passed on through the water element. If you think about water metaphorically as body fluids, including sperm, blood, like the synovial fluids, all the fluids in the body. We are born in water. We dissolve from form into formlessness in death. We talked about a lot of things in the water element class. Held in the kidney jing, in the kidneys control what the water element is our genetics, is it what's passed on through our genetic lineage, and also what you're very distracting right now. Um, but also it holds all of our potential, right? If you remember in the water element class, we talked about potential and how water is a container for potential. Now, if we think about the ocean, the vastness of the ocean, and the sun rising over the horizon, right? This is fire coming out of water. And this central axis is the relationship of fire to water. And in Taoist medicine, we have heaven and earth, and human beings are a conduit. We're a portal between heaven and earth. And we're drawing this energy, the energy of fire, of consciousness, of awareness, of the ability to perceive, of self-awareness, and the unconscious depths and of the earth, and is what is happening beneath the surface. This relationship of consciousness and unconsciousness and the human being between them as the conduit is this central axis of the depth in water and the presence of fire. It's the heart and kidney axis. And it's our ability through will, through the J, using our willpower to create a portal between the unconscious and the conscious to understand ourselves, to understand who we are. When the heart fire is in excess, when it's not healthy, it will exhaust the kidneys. The fire is too big. What does heat and fire do to water, right? It dries it up, burns it up. So when the heart fire through desire, excess desires, through relationships and the constant need for connection, through emotions, in Taoism, emotions should kind of come and go gently. They aren't meant to be indulged, really. And through experiences and stimulation and the need for experiences, that is the heart fire in excess, that need for experience. And it burns out the kidneys. It burns up the fire or the water. Whereas when the kidney water is in excess, it manifests as fear, fear of the unknown, fear of death, fear of what happens if I go out and explore, which is fire energy, fear of intimacy, of closeness, of vulnerability, fear of not having enough resources, etc. If that kidney fear, that water is too strong, it extinguishes the opening in the heart. If the water element is too strong, the water overpowers the fire and the heart starts to close and withdraw, right? So fire without water burns the body, and water without fire freezes the heart. So we have to cultivate an ability to stay present in life without acting out and without shutting down. So fire loves through presence. And this is why we cultivate presence through mindfulness, through meditation, mindful tea ceremony, through staying present with a person, making eye contact, listening to the tone of their voice, not just what they're saying, through cultivating presence, um, we are bringing the wisdom of facing our fears in the water, and we are bringing the intelligence of love and desire through the presence of the heart. And this central axis of fire and water, when a person has it intact, when they live virtuously, and the fire and water axis is intact, that creates coherence throughout their entire being. And this is a person who has propriety. And propriety is the virtue of fire. When you have propriety, you are the master of your being. You are present. You are home. There's nobody who can knock you off your center. And when you meet people who have a clear heart kidney axis, they're very potent people. You can feel their presence. That's the person who walks in the room and you can feel a sense of gravitas, of coherence. And there's also a warmth that's not excessive or disingenuous. It's just a warmth that radiates, right? There's a sincerity or an authenticity there. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I think in the last class, I'll try to wrap together how the five elements kind of work together, right? Because that was just talking about the fire water axis. But what does fire do to earth? What does fire do to metal? What does fire do to wood? Too much fire, it burns the wood. But a healthy relationship there, the wood fuels the fire, right? Wood and fire people work well together as long as they don't overwhelm each other. So, you know, the more closely and intimately we understand the elements, the more we can see them, the more you start to see the interrelationship between them, right? They're constantly interacting with each other to create life, you know? Ultimately, it's the movement of chi. Um, and the intention of this course is really just to start to get a little deeper flavor of each element, to look for it in yourself, to ask the questions that, the prompts that we're emailing you, to meditate and to start to connect more subtly and sensitively to these energies in your life. It's not to figure something out, it's just to start to see them as they're manifesting moment by moment in your lived experience.